earlier, I discussed the different types of radiation on the electromagnetic spectrum. So on our electromagnetic spectrum, based on wavelength, we have radio waves, microwaves, infrared waves, visible light, ultraviolet rays, X-rays, and gamma rays. And we know that all of these different types of waves have different levels of energy. Let me go back to my diagram. Here at the bottom is I have a wave example. The longer the wavelength, again, and that's the distance between 2 points on the wave. So the longer the wavelength, the less energy that it has. As the wavelength gets shorter and shorter, we actually gain energy. We're gaining energy. So less energy, more energy. Visible light with all of the different colors, so red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet, they also have wavelengths. Actually, their wavelengths is very similar to this one here. Red light is going to have a longer wavelength, where blue and violet light is going to have a shorter wavelength. Now, in order to see this, we use a diffraction gradient. And a diffraction gradient is something that we use in optics to bend or split light. So here is an example of a diffraction gradient, and we can take it and we can use it and look. I had that upside down. We can look at the light and it will bend the light for us. Now on these glasses that I used, the lens is actually a diffraction gradient. A prism is a diffraction gradient. It's just a different shape. Okay, in my previous video, I used these really flimsy glasses to talk about the continuous spectrum when we look outside or when we look at light bulbs. But you can also use a prism. Many scientists use a prism, and a prism is typically a triangular piece of glass. This one is not traditional shape. They're typically a little bit bigger. But anyways, so I'm going to take this prism and I can bend the light from the sun. So I'm going to take my prism, and if I angle it just right, let's see if I can get that. There we go. I can bend the light from the sun into the continuous spectrum. Now again, you don't have to have a prism or a triangular piece of glass to do it. You don't have to have this. Any piece of glass will work, even water. Water will also work. Now, here's another piece of glass. It is a Chaos Emerald. I stole it from Sonic. Anyways, here's a very thick piece of glass, and I can also bend the light from the sun using this, and if I angle it just right, the way that this one is shaped, let's see if I can get it to do it. There we go. I can also get the continuous spectrum just from using a larger piece of glass. It does the same thing. Now, sprinklers do the same thing. If you look at a sprinkler while it is running, if you look at it at just the right angle, you can also see the continuous spectrum, along with right after it rains. Typically right after a rainstorm, the water that's in the air, the rainbow that you typically see, that's what that is. water is bending the light from the sun into the different colors so that we can see it. And yeah. Now, we can look at different gases in a discharge chamber, so a tube of some kind, and we can shoot electrons or energy. We can shoot electrons at a gas, and this black box that's right here is actually very, very, very high powered. You have to be very careful with it. And what it will do is it will shoot energy into a gas. And I have some different gases here in these boxes, but the gases in the tubes, they kind of look like light bulbs a little bit. Not exactly, but I can't touch them with my bare hands. That's why I have to put on gloves, because the oils from my hands could cause the glass to break, and well, we don't want that. So I'm actually going to demonstrate what this looks like. If I can get it out. There we go. The black boxes provide a high amount of energy, and these glass tubes here, again, they kind of look like light bulbs, not the same. This has a gas in it. This one is hydrogen. And let me actually put it in the box. You have to be very careful when you do this. Let me move it a little closer. This box is going to put so much energy into this gas here that the gas is going to light up. Let's take a look. See that? That's very cool. Now I can't have this on for very long, because what will happen is the glass will get hot, and if this glass gets too hot, this bulb will break. And these bulbs here, they're about $50 to $100 each, which is not a lot, but that can get costly very quickly. Okay, so we can actually look at the light that these different gases or these different elements emit, and we can study it. Now, the study of light is called spectroscopy, and we look at light using a spectroscope, which is actually, I have a spectroscope here. So it's got a diffraction gradient in it, and we can take it and we can point it at a light source, and we can look at the different colors produced. And hold on, let me put this away. I'm going to show you the other one. Give me just a second. So that one was hydrogen. This one is helium. So let's take a look at what helium looks like. So again, another glass tube. And I am going to very carefully put it inside this box because I don't want to break it. There we go. And when I turn it on, it's going to put a high amount of energy in. Different color. This one's not pink. See that? That is very, very cool. And I actually have all kinds of different elements to look at. I'm going to turn that off. Now, visible spectrum comes in 3 different types. We have continuous spectrum, absorption spectrum, and emission spectrum. A continuous spectrum is produced from an incandescent light, so a light bulb, basically, a light bulb. Or if we walk outside, we can also see it. Continuous spectrum means that the colors are uninterrupted, so they're smooth. And I actually kind of drew that when I colored this in. The colors are smooth. Well, almost. I almost drew it. Anyways, it's uninterrupted. Now, absorption spectrum is very close to a continuous spectrum. Losing my train of thought. An absorption spectrum is produced when our visible light is passed through a gas. So for this one was helium, and it is under low pressure, and the wavelengths that we see. So here's an example. It's the same diagram, but what I did is I drew dark lines in. It appears to be continuous, except that there will be dark lines throughout the spectra. Now the dark lines are areas where that wavelength got absorbed by the gas. Emission spectrum is produced by a hot gas, where absorption is a cool gas, and what it produces is, instead, we get a black background with different colored lines. So here's hydrogen and helium. This is what I would see with my spectroscope if I were to look at the bulb. We would get a black background with different colored lines. Now, very similar to absorption, but not quite the same. Now, if we had a gas that's producing both the absorption spectrum and the emission spectrum, if it's producing both, the dark lines on the absorption spectrum and the bright lines on the emission spectrum, they would line up exactly if it was the same gas. Now, let's think about this, the big picture. If we look at stars, most of them show dark lines, so most of them would be the absorption spectrum. When we study stars, we look at that absorption spectrum that they produce, and we compare them to known elements on Earth. So hydrogen, helium, carbon, different elements. We study the light, we study what it's going to produce, and then we compare it to what we see in the stars, and that is how we know what stars are made of. We know that 90% of stars are made out of hydrogen and helium. We study that, and then we compare it based on what we see in space, and that is how we are able to identify what stars are made out of.